As they grow older, they will develop curiosity and discernment. When what they are taught is not matched with reality, truth, the conflict develops. These little children need to be consistently taught by the teachers, their curriculum, their spiritual leaders, and civic authorities. This truth will form a strong foundation for them to develop upright character and integrity. It is never wrong to teach truth. It is always wrong to teach lies. What we are seeing in our schools is the falling away from truth. A teacher without a right to law, protected and lifestyle choices cannot be a role model. Curriculum, books, and bulletin boards that do not teach truth derail the process of developing caring and responsible citizens. President Harry S. Truman stated in his memoirs, and I quote, "The fundamental basis of this nation's laws was given to Moses on the Mount. The fundamental basis of our Bill of Rights comes from the teachings we get from Exodus, St. Matthew, Isaiah, and St. Paul." I don't think we emphasize that enough these days. If we don't have the proper fundamental moral background, we will finally wind up with a totalitarian government which does not believe in rights to anybody except the state. Remember, the state is to stay out of the church, but the church should influence the state, which includes the public schools. I believe we need to speak out against the faulty gender policy plan as it bleeds into every area of our FP&A education. We need a good and wholesome policy that encourages character and righteous living. We need truth over cultural lies. So I just beg you, school board, look at the gender policy plan. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to comment. Helen brought up some bulletin boards at Knapp Elementary. I've seen the bulletin boards, and I'm very pleased with the work that our staff has done. Very welcoming bulletin boards, no hidden agenda or anything like that. So we do teach that all students are welcome in our schools, and we will continue to teach that. And I applaud the staff for doing a nice job with the bulletin boards.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mike Cooper.
At the last school board meeting, I shared a number of bits of wisdom. One of them was, few pays the bill of politicians. Many of the freedoms and controls over the day-to-day operation of school board have been usurped by the easy money of the state and federal governments. Mandates and regulations, how to spend the money, has taken away a major amount of control individual school districts have over the education of the students. The majority of the parents, grandparents, and taxpayers have no idea what the state and federal government are requiring in schools today, except those items which are highlighted by the media today. Parents look at the test scores of math, reading, and language, and they see a loss of academic achievement, which districts blame on a whole host of issues. But that does not help a student who is falling below the expected level of the grade being completed. But parents do get to hear how the districts are moving heaven and earth to accommodate every progressive idea of how students should be indoctrinated into accepting as fact gender dysphoria as normal, theory of global warming, and the equity myth. How do parents get a handle on what is happening to their child in school? The first step would be to know what the board members actually think. The present spokesperson interviewed on TV, she gave the following statement that should send chills down the spine of every parent. She said, "The responsibility of raising a child is not the responsibility of parents or a family, but the community." Is that what the members of the board think? Do you think that the education of the student is the responsibility of the parents in cooperation, or do you think that education of the student is the responsibility of the parents in cooperation with the school board? At the next meeting, I'll share an option for you. At the next meeting, I'll share an option that you have in your quiver to meet those actual educational needs for the student. Thank you.
Next up, we have the consent agenda. Short consent agenda this evening. We have a request for student travel for the MHS FBLA and certification of a NAT safety drill.
Move we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Motion by Carl, second by Abe. Thank you. Any discussion? Anything? There's no questions or discussion, let's vote. There we go. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have the personnel consent agenda, which is one very exciting hire here. Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
And Amy got it. Any discussion here?
Rachel, I would like to point out on this one, this is one example where the educator shortage has hit our school district. We had a school psychologist vacancy posted, I believe since February, Sam, and we were not able to hire another school psychologist. And many people probably don't know what a school psychologist does, but a lot of what they do is they assess students, especially students who have disabilities and need assessments in order to qualify for services. And we have a high number of students in our school district that either already have been identified with a disability or have been referred for a disability, and the workload on our current school psychologist is not manageable. So I really appreciate the work that Tony Kwiski, our Director of Student Services, did, as well as Samantha White, our Director of HR. We've been thinking outside the box for months now, trying to figure out a way to support our school psychologist staff, knowing that we were not able to add another school psychologist. So we're very pleased to be hiring a special education evaluator. This person is not a school psychologist, but they're able to do, through their certification, a number of duties that will help provide some relief to our school psychologists. But, you know, if we as a school district here in Menomonie are struggling in this realm, you can only imagine what some of the other schools in some more remote areas are dealing with. So we obviously encourage you to approve this hire, and I thought it was a good example to educate the board and the community on how the staffing situation is impacting our schools.
Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, let's vote. And the motion passes. Next up, we have one item on our action agenda tonight, which is the approval of revisions to policy 652.1 regarding pre-admissions for staff. We discussed this at, I'll entertain a motion to approve. By Dale. Signed by Amber. We discussed this at length last time, and I believe, and gave permission for it to be put into use during homecoming. Any other questions or comments about it? Seeing none, let's vote.
Coaches, do you guys maybe want to go up there? There's three chairs. Oh, either way. Tony will be back. She's in a meeting right now.
All right, and motion passes unanimously. Our first discussion item tonight is a review of instructional coaching and SDMA.
As board members know, the administrative team gets together twice a month, the day after each board meeting. So we have a board meeting tomorrow. And at our last meeting, we had a presentation from our district instructional coaches. And we felt it was such a powerful presentation that this is something that would be very good for the board and the community to hear. They're not going to give you a long presentation, but just kind of run through some things and let you know how valuable these services are for our school district. So am I supposed to kick this to you, Brian? I'll kick it to Brian. The coaches work in his department and Tony's department, so Brian, go ahead.
Yep, and I'm gonna keep my words pretty brief and let our community instructional coaches share information with you, but instructional coaching isn't new in our district. It's something we've had in place for several years. In our current format, probably going on about 10 years. The primary responsibility that our instructional coaches have is to work with staff and help them in a variety of ways refine and own their craft. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tara Allison, Amy Lovell, and Kylie and Chucky, who are our instructional coaches.
Hi everyone, I'm Tara. This is my 27th year in education, and I have a literacy emphasis with the staff.
Hi, my name is Kylie Chucky. This is my, I believe, 18th year in education and my first year with Menomonie as an instructional coach, focusing on math.
Hi, I'm Amy Wumble. This is my 20th year with the district, or 19th year with the district, and working with the emphasis of behavior. All right, so looking at the document that was created last spring, which we are excited to get in all staff members' hands starting actually tomorrow, we go into some buildings. You'll see our guiding question is how can we help or how can I help? And a little story behind that guiding question that led us to developing this menu was we borrowed that idea from Dr. Max Goodwin with the TV show New Amsterdam, and he is the new medical director. So he's the medical director of the largest, oldest public medical center in New York City, and as he was approaching this task as the new medical director, he presented the question with any issue that arose, any staff meeting that he was in, and anywhere that he was, he presented the question with how can I help? And he always kind of looked at it as a collaborative team approach and problem solving with him as the leader, but using everybody else's ideas as well. And so as we try to define what we do and what we can share with staff, we are in all of the buildings. Many of the staff members know us. However, there are some who do not know us or maybe ask what we do and how can we help them. So that kind of came about with this menu idea, which we'll be talking about. But also, if you watch the show or kind of with Max Goodwin asking how he can help, it kind of comes full circle with his staff coming to him and asking how they can help. And so it's really a collaborative team approach.
All right, so as coaches, we wear coaching hats, but we're also in charge, under Brian, but of the mentoring program. So it's a perfect fit for coaches because we get to know our new teachers and we work heavily with our first and our second year staff. So that's like a perfect side for us. We go, we email them all the time. We're in meeting with them, and it's just how we do business here in Menomonie. We're here to help them. We want to make their first and second year as successful as we can. So that's like one of our main targets of our job. Another part, we go into our K-12 PLC. So we will spend at least 6 meetings with every K-5 teacher through their PLC. So those staff at each school in the K-5 buildings will meet, I think, almost every week, but we slide in about every 6 weeks, and we have a touch point with every staff. From there, they make appointments with us because they see our faces and we see what's going on in the buildings, and we're there to help. Our 6-12 teachers, we're going to hit their department meetings, and that's how we are rolling out our menu and work with our 6-12. So we see all our teachers.
We support in curriculum and behavior. There's a new ELA curriculum this year that teachers can support in, new math strategies, instructional strategies, anything teachers might need. We're able to do one-on-one with them. We can work with them for weeks if they need us. And some other things that we do offer PD, so we could do something for the entire staff if the principal and the staff see the need. Also on in-service days, we can also provide professional development. And as, I don't want to speak for Amy, but so I'll be math and then Tara is literacy, and then Amy is behavioral. But Amy is more of, she definitely wants to be proactive instead of reactive with the students in the classroom and help build capacity for those teachers so that they can have more of a role in handling behaviors in classroom management. Now I want to open it up for questions of anybody.
While you're thinking of your questions, just a few acronyms that I heard. PLC, Professional Learning Communities, that's what our teachers get together in meetings. ELA, English Language Arts, and PD, Professional Development. Interpretation. Any questions at all for our coaches tonight?
I have one. So I know you two are both math, reading, and literacy focused. Do you find that as the behavioral coach, you go into classrooms like outside of that, like with like specialists in elementary or other areas outside of those? Or do you also work with teachers that are working on literacy math?
Is that directed towards me?
Yeah.
Behavior? Oh, absolutely. I go to every classroom, any classroom where there's a need, anywhere where I can help. I work with general ed, special ed, any instructional staff, with anybody who's interacting with students.
We really do overlap quite a bit. A couple of days ago, we were in working with some special ed teachers and working on the universal screener that we do and how to integrate their students. And so, I mean, yeah, we have an emphasis, but we really do share the load with each other on all instruction and best practices.
I know Amy's working with a teacher right now, one of our new teachers on, behavior, and we're going to kind of cycle through because that's not the only need she has, but rather than overwhelm her, get that taken care of first, and then we'll come in as the academic coaches and help in some of the other areas as well.
How much of the interventional support to the staff do you feel, and I suspect it will be across the board, with students that have IEPs versus not? In other words, is your coaching time disproportionately having to support IEPs and especially challenging behaviors compared to the general learners?
Oh, that's a tough question. Wow.
I didn't plan to ask it this.
No, I think it's really, it's not exclusive to, and it's everyone. Like right now, when I'm helping roll out with the K2 staff, it's for all the students, for all kids in K2 with the yearly curriculum. We definitely do, we have interventionists that work inside the buildings. So K-12, we have interventionists that are working with the students. So we are doing a lot of coaching on this end with them. So we are helping them figure out how to work. So those would be with our students that we're trying to keep out of special education, give them a little boost. So we do work a lot with that group, and our special ed teachers, yes, they do use us a lot. It's tough to be masters of everything. And that's why our elementary teachers, we find they are really calling us a lot too, because they're expected to know math, literacy, science, social studies. So our coaching does look different K-5 than it does 6-12, because 6-12 teachers are more masters of their trade. So,
I would say I'm really split. I can't put a percentage on one side versus the other, but middle school and high school, I probably am supporting more of the special ed teachers with students who maybe need an outside eye with a behavior plan or behavior goals and monitoring, because the older students are more likely to those the frequency of behaviors they're getting services or they've been staffed in service. A lot of my work is at the elementaries. The 5 elementaries, more of my emphasis is developing proactive pieces and providing them supports and supporting the teacher who maybe wants that team approach and maybe really decipher if it isn't going to a special ed referral or writing a behavior plan for a student who doesn't necessarily receive special ed services nor need special ed services. Teachers are more comfortable in handling behavior if they know what to do and how to be proactive with it. And a big piece of my work is supporting the teachers who want that team approach and bring together a team such as we would and a special ed team, but it doesn't have to, the student doesn't need services to bring parents and the administrator and supports together, to really work it out to where it might not or may not be a need of special ed. And then also working with staff members to where what I say is the students will be okay as long as those holding the students are okay. And so it's a lot of just building up the teacher capacity to support the teacher and not direct services to the student with the behaviors or the challenging pieces in the classroom.
And I'm just getting started here, but some things that I've done in the past as an instructional coach, working with the teachers to roll out curriculum, that would be like a classroom level activity, small groups with students that focus on whatever skill they need, and just enrichment. Also, how can we make this learning more fun and just adding, a little flair.
Are there, other than kind of the broad three specialties, are there themes or commonalities in what teachers are asking for, especially throughout the year? Now, obviously, the first couple weeks we start, there might be all sorts of things to kind of get established as teachers come in. Then, as the year goes on, are there things that teachers keep saying, I really need help with this, I really still need help with this, I still need help with this, that, would be of interest to the board?
I think one thing that I hear a lot of is just how can I help my students that are struggling to learn. So that's definitely a theme that I really hone in with our teachers.
Something that comes up a lot is I don't have time. I never have time to get everything in. So we can help them prioritize and kind of look at their schedule and see where they can maybe get some minutes back from transition time and things like that.
And to that point about time too, how does that, you mentioned that you also do coaching with instructional staff, paraeducators and so on as well. So that time part of it is a really complicated bundle between the teacher and the paras who assist and so on. So is there any more kind of detail there on where time can be recovered or where it goes?
Okay. So during PLC meetings and collaborative team meetings, parents are available to meet with the teachers. They can talk about students then.
And that's one of the things, and I know we're well wrapping up here, but that's one of the things that our district has been ahead on, is that we've been able to schedule common planning time really across the board. And that's something that a lot of districts have really had to challenge trying to be able to do. It's not perfect, and we can always use more time, but we're very fortunate to have that here.
We'll meet individually or in small groups with our paras too. So they will reach out to us just like our other our teaching staff do.
I would say my most meaningful time is our days that are in the calendar for professional development, where staff are able to get together where we don't have the students in front of us. Really leaving some meaningful pieces to anybody, but then really listening to the voice of what they need and then coming up with some professional development that helps meet that.
And is it right, this menu is a new thing this year, is that correct? The services or the actual activity isn't necessarily changing, but the creation of this menu is new?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it looks really great.
Thank you. Yeah, like Brian said, we've been doing this for years, but this is the first year we're actually putting the menu together. We talk to teachers about these things, but now it's just, hanging out. We handed them out to each new staff member, and we're going to be talking about, like tomorrow at our PLC meeting, we're going to show it to the teachers and really encourage it, because there's a variety of ways we can help them, and they might pick one, and that somebody else might pick something totally different. So we're hoping to really just for them to see the variety.
That looks like a great way to help kind of start those conversations.
And the three of us are going to meet monthly at the end of the month to see, what are teachers requesting or what are principals kind of using us for the most. And then we'll just make it better as the year goes on.
I have one small question. We're talking about budget, we're talking about potential referendum and state funds and all of these things. I can't help but wonder, is this a very important resource that we use in our district to deal with unfunded changes in curriculum, things that are mandated standards come out, right? Now you all have to do them and do them fast and do them by this date because the state says so. Are you the buffer that helps our teachers get that done as well?
I'll answer that question. Yes, and it's not just state mandated stuff, but it's any curricular changes. Without this support, you know, it's not, having coaches is not mandatory.
No, but
You do need to have important for the efficacy of our programming.
yeah, of the concept being, if the state mandates curriculum changes, we need these guys to help with that. We need to be able to pay them at the end of the day to deal with state mandated changes. Yeah, okay.
I know earlier we talked about how important the intervention specialists are as far as helping with achievement. And I just want to applaud you all for doing the work that you do. I think that's really important because I think we got things with some of the goals we're going to look at later and some of the things that we've done, we know that it works. And as long as it works, I think we need to keep moving forward. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for being here tonight. Oh,
Sorry, I have a question, I think maybe for Brian and Joe. I was just remembering when we had our AIM presentation, this could have been a long time ago, I don't remember. I think one of the end goals of that program is the district taking on its own instructional coach, connected to the arts. Is that something that would be added to this team, or is that a separate thing? As a possibility.
So the short answer is that is a question we're still looking at. Where does that fit? But it is very much complementary to this type of a model.
And I would add that we do get a lot of support from Nicole Cook and the workers that we have with the AIM program. The real question is going to be is once our AIM grant expires, one more year, was it, Brian?
Two
more. One more year after this year, so this year and one more, then the decision will have to be made whether or not that's something that can be sustained in our district.
Really, really quick on that, I worked with Nicole a couple of weeks ago. She went into a 6th grade language arts classroom. It was a newer teacher, but we also have a new literacy resource in middle school. And so this new teacher was blending in her AIM training and our new literacy curriculum. It was one of the best lessons I've ever seen. I mean, she was dynamite, and I could just see the AIM stuff, just woven in there. It was just great, and so it really did enhance the instruction quite a bit. So that was a long topic, but it was really good. I was just blown away.
Totally on topic, thank you for sharing. I'm always happy to talk about how great AIM is, so let's stop.
all right. Thank you for being here tonight. And next we have student enrollment update.
So I see Tonya was able to get out of her meeting, but I'll take the introduction on this. I appreciate the work that Tonya and her team has done in terms of working with the principals and getting the preliminary count. As noted, this is just a preliminary count of the number of students in our schools. There's a number of calculations that have to occur in terms of, are they full-day students, are they part-day students, things like that. So the final FTE will be shared at a later time. We really take a close look at enrollment in our January mid-year budget hearing when we'll have our FTE trends. In terms of number of student bodies, it's down a few, I think maybe 13 less than last year. So that's something we have to continue to track closely. But Tony, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, unless there's questions.
It's really just informational at this point. Any questions by the board?
I do have a question, I meant to email this, I apologize, and I think it might be a silly question. Would students open enrolling out include going to a private school in town?
No,
Okay.
we can't count, those are not part of the calculation. So students that would go to a St. Joe's or St. Paul's in school, they are not part of this calculation.
It would include students going to a virtual school outside of our school district.
Yep.
Or a physical school outside of our school district. Our open roll out has stayed the same for a number of years. I would say that our open roll in has increased. But again, we can go through that in more detail in January.
All right, there's no more questions. Next up, we have the Achievement Annual SLO Report.
And Brian's gonna take this. Go ahead, Brian.
So this is an annual report that we do in the fall each year. So each summer, we have building level teams that will meet to review the goals that they had set in the prior year. The nice thing that we have been observing over the last couple of years is some steady improvement related with attainment of building level goals, whether that's through our screening report, through state assessment, or the individual student learning outcomes that are set, that are reported out in the SSO report. Two documents that I included in the background would be a summary of last year's screening data. So we use a number of academic screening assessments throughout the year to gauge growth from fall and then into the spring. And what we noticed last school year across the district, in the area of literacy, we had increase in overall proficiency levels in 9 of 12 screening grades. We screen each of those grades. And then stable proficiency, meaning that very similar throughout the course of the year in 3 of 12. The nice thing that we're seeing as a result of that is an increase in the number of grade levels that proficiency levels from fall to spring is increasing. We noticed following the statewide shutdown that in the area of literacy, we saw a pretty substantial drop off in overall proficiency level, and we're starting to see that climb back up. As far as yearly growth, as we look at math, we're seeing an increase in proficiency of 8 of 11 grades. You'll notice there's one grade that isn't accounted for in this math screener, and that is kindergarten, just the way the screeners are set up. And stable proficiency in 3 of 11 screen grades. And then when we take a look at growth throughout the course of the year, we have observed high growth in 5 of 11 and expected growth in 4 of 11. And again, those numbers are going up when we look to prior years as well. So we're starting to see what I would identify as a more traditional level of proficiency, as well as growth occurring throughout the course of the school year. A little bit later on this fall, we'll come back and we'll report on the state assessment that the kids took last spring. The second document that is included is the specific SLO or school learning outcomes, which are the annual goals that buildings set for themselves. Again, these teams meet during the summer and they take a look at how they did in relation to the goals they set the prior year, and whether or not they met or did not meet the goal that was set is laid out. Most buildings will have a literacy and a math goal, and then in some cases they'll have a student behavior goal that they're working towards as well. But not all buildings choose the same goals because they try to be responsive to what they're seeing in their buildings. After they review how they did on the prior year's goal, they'll take a look at the student population within the building and where the needs are. And they'll adjust the goals for the upcoming year. Now, the nice thing that I've observed in the time that I've been here is our buildings do not shy away from setting what I would consider to be very ambitious goals, recognizing that in some cases it may take them multiple years to achieve those goals, with the idea that they don't want to just set a goal for the sake of achieving it. They want to set a goal for the sake of growing and building towards that and meeting the needs that are in their buildings. So when I look at this, sometimes I'll get the question, well, we see we have buildings that didn't meet their goal. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And the reality is, whether or not they met or didn't meet the goal, it's the action plan that they've developed to address the needs that are present in the building. So one of the things that I do throughout the course of the year is I meet with principals a minimum of 3 times throughout the course of the year to review not only their progress toward the goal, but how successful are they being in their building at carrying out the action steps that they've put in place. And generally what we find is the more action steps that we can achieve, the closer we get towards our goals throughout the course of the year. And it really has helped, I think, our buildings to set goals that are both meaningful, but then also are something that is going to help all students in the buildings. So at this time, I'm happy to go through and answer any questions related to goals that were set, or the screening report, or general questions that you might have.
So on the SLOs, I imagine those are really, it's a project of the principal in collaboration with yourself and their team. In the last year, we've had a lot of movement of principals, right? And so how are the kind of goals and the action plans for those goals maintained as the leadership of each building moves around?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that you hit on. It's a collaborative effort, and the nice thing we have is while we've had movement with principals, we've had the opportunity with some transition planning for principals to collaborate with each other as they were moving between buildings or as they were leaving buildings. But the other thing too is the process that they use involves a building leadership team. And while we may have principals who have transitioned into different roles, there's a lot of stability with those leadership teams within their buildings. And it's really nice to see the active role that our staff at a building level take in this process. Having had the opportunity to meet with the teams at all of the buildings, when we meet during the course of the summer, my role is to facilitate the process, but not lead the process. That's a building level effort. And it really is a very collaborative effort throughout the building, and our principals do an amazing job, in my opinion, of asking some really good questions of their teams, and then letting the team really kind of flesh out, well, where is the need, and then more importantly, where's the evidence to support that that's an need that we have. Thanks.
My question is, even if they don't meet the goal, are they working toward it, are they moving up instead of staying stagnant or going down, or are they pretty much all of them are working towards getting there?
Yep. So the short answer is, they are continuing to progress towards the achievement of their goals. What I will say is one of the biggest questions that the teams ask themselves is, if they hit the goal or if they didn't hit the goal, why? And they ask themselves, okay, what evidence do we have to support that that the actions that we did helped us to achieve that goal or didn't? Now, what I will say is a number of the goals that they set, if they didn't hit them, we're seeing that they are much closer to hitting those. And it's one of the reasons why we're not seeing, in my opinion, a lot of change from one year to the next as to what the target is because they're continuing to progress toward that and feeling that it remains a fairly reasonable target.
Recognizing that these goals are largely about, like you just said, like the school as a team coming together and figuring out their plan and really addressing the needs on site. I think it'd be great for the school board in this report for next year to be able to see like what that progress is toward a goal. So for example, if we have a goal not met, where the goal was a 60% proficiency in, the math assessment, for example, like it'd be nice to know, is it 59, is it 46, is it 12, is that something that we could maybe see in the future on this report?
It absolutely is. And the reality is, especially at the levels when we're talking about multi-grade level goals, one of the challenges that presents, and one of the reasons why on this report up to this point it's been a goal met, not met, is when we're looking across multiple grade levels, you may have one grade level that is really close and another grade level that is further away. At the same time, that's one of the things that the teams talk about in their meetings, so we can easily include that in the future, yes.
I see that Oklahoma is kind of like that, where it says met at 88%, and then it says not met, but at 84% instead of the 85% that they were looking for. So I think that's kind of what we're looking for. So.
I want credit for that too, if I got to 84.
But it's a good idea.
And I can make sure that we're we're consistent in putting that in, because I can find all this information, so.
I also just want to applaud that the schools are continuing to set ambitious goals and work really hard toward them. I know I've attended the Title I meetings at Downsville where we talk about exactly these. And it's just great to be in the room to hear the building leadership and parents and everyone together talking about like what it is we're working toward, what the plans are to get there.
I also really appreciate that these goals are set by each school on an individual level with where they're at and not a blanket goal for everybody. I really appreciate that. Each set of kids at each school is dealing with different things, so thanks.
Any more questions for Brian? If not, we'll move on to plans for remote learning during school cancellation.
Well, hopefully we don't have to have any school cancellations this year like last year. But as you know, last year we piloted the idea of remote learning on school cancellation days, and it went really well from what we received back with feedback. And one thing we heard from our staff through our QIC meetings and other feedback was that it would be really helpful to have a more clearly articulated plan going into the winter season. And we have certain ways that days are made up for students, for teachers, for hourly employees. So as the administrative team, we've tried to get together and make sure we have clear expectations for any days that we end up having remote learning, but then two, trying to identify in the front end how much room is in the calendar and what the plan will be for making up days. And as you know, we had 3 jumpstart days, so some of the cushion that we had in our calendar is no longer there, but we still have room for 4 cancellation days. 4 cancellation days and still meet the hours of instruction requirement from the state. So as you can see in the plan, we would have 4 days. After that, we've identified 3 potential makeup days if need be. Now, even if we haven't gotten to those 4th days, we still may have remote learning days before that. It just really depends on the circumstances having to do with the cancellation. If we have one of those storms coming in and it's very clear that we're not going to have school the next day, if we can let people know early enough and people can plan ahead, that would be a good day for a remote learning day. If we already use our 4 cancellation days, then we may have more remote learning days where there isn't as much notice, but my plan would be to give as much notice as possible. And then students, K-12 would have expectations. We've provided guidelines not only for students, but for staff and then also for families for how those days would go. We also have a document for our staff members explaining how the makeup days work. We have information in our employee handbook as well, but to have it in one place, we think will make it easier for our staff. But do board members have any questions? Otherwise, it's really just more informational. As you can see, we're ready to share this out with our staff before the bad weather hits. Any questions?
I just want to clarify. So there's 4 days, makeup days because of the jump start that we wouldn't have to make up necessarily.
It's not because of the jump start. What I'm saying is because we used some of our contract time with jump start,
Okay.
The jump start days don't count towards hours of instruction.
Okay.
But we would have 4 days that we would have flexibility with.
Okay, and then after that, then it would be really good to go remote so they don't have to make up days, is that correct?
We would need to make up the time after 4 cancellations. So yes, if we cancel 4 times, then I would say remote learning would be needed, or we would have to schedule a makeup day.
Okay, but the remote learning takes the place of making up a day, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear, thank you.
And also just to clarify, we're not going to wait for 4 days off before we use remote learning. If we get a good circumstance that fits that plan well, we'll go ahead. It could be the first day, and we could end up using remote learning.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
And this isn't something, the board approved the changes to the employee handbook that covered this, right? So there's nothing we need to approve here in terms of a policy.
No, they're really just guidelines, and we wanted to share the guidelines with the board, one, so that you're informed, and two, if you had any feedback to provide.
Joel, how's Menomonie Transportation doing with supply of substitute bus drivers? About what they were, or any worse off, or?
In terms of remote learning?
Well, I'm thinking, you know, if you get a bad flu season, you could have 5 bus drivers out. Are we gonna run into any trouble with that?
I know that their staffing has been better, but I think there's always challenges, so if anybody's interested in driving bus. I think there was a recent state law that allows school board members to drive bus. Yeah, volunteer to drive bus.
Do anything you want, you want to say it?
Any other questions or comments about these documents? This is a really thorough breakdown of what happens for the remote learning, and I appreciate the attention to detail that's gone into this.
One note on that, as this will be disseminated to parents in some form, I think these are very detailed and might be a lot to digest with different cases. So maybe if there's a simpler flow chart, or when something's announced, to really lay out exactly clearly what kind of day it is. It'd be kind of 2 different kinds of days going into the future. It'd be understandable parents might get a little confused.
Yeah, and I think the protocols with the 3 columns is really the only one that would be for the parents. The real detailed stuff would be more for staff. But to your point, Abe, I think it would be better to have a message with the details linked to the message. Yeah, good idea.
All right, next we have discussion of the 2024 health insurance renewal.
So this has come before the board already a few times over the last several months, knowing that there's going to need to be some changes to our health insurance plan in the school district. We've talked about timelines, we've talked about action plans, and now we're getting further into the process. There was a committee meeting last week. I appreciated Leah and Sam chairing the meeting. I also know that Rachel attended and Carla attended, representing the board. And it was a real good discussion with the consultant that we have working with us from USI. It still is a process where more information needs to be provided in terms of numbers and options, but we are looking at expanding our current health insurance offering and offering a high deductible HSA plan for staff members. With the cost of insurance, we want to provide staff members with more options for their dollars. Instead of just having the option of purchasing and investing their dollars in premiums, we'd like to have an option where for those staff members that it makes sense, they could use a HSA. I don't know if Carl or Rachel have any comments while I take a drink of water. Excuse me.
I'll say that was the main, this option for a high deductible HSA plan was the main topic of conversation, I think, at the committee meeting last week. It seemed like it was pretty evenly split, with some people on the committee were really familiar with HSAs and how this would work, and others were really not. Overall, I think people were really interested in it, though. That was my impression, that wanted to know more, thought it could be a good fit for some people. We heard a lot of questions, but not a lot of concern, I would say, about that as an option.
And I think the idea of not forcing it as the only option is important. And then the real nice thing is that we have established a process, essentially a vehicle for educating our staff members about the benefits, not just the health insurance benefits, but all the different benefits in the school district. And the committee helped us develop a presentation. Boy, it must have been almost 6 or 7 years ago now. And we kind of call it the Traveling Roadshow, where Leah and Sam and I will go to each building and then also host a meeting here. I think we've also provided a virtual opportunity. So we want to provide a lot of opportunity for staff members to be able to ask their questions, to hear information, and certainly when we have a change to our health insurance plan, like we're anticipating this year, that educational components can be very important. So we plan to do that. More information will be coming to the board. We will be asking the board to approve a renewal in October. Our plan year runs from January 1 to December 31st, so we're getting towards the end of our current plan year. And for a renewal on January 1, we will have to have a plan approved. Carl, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I would just be super clear that we're talking about adding another option, not removing any of the existing ways of obtaining the health insurance through the school's plan. Coverage, from my understanding, for the HSA plan would be very much like what's in the other traditional plans. It's just a payment vehicle, the tax advantage for those who can make work. Some of the other, spending claims are still high, that has not changed. I would not expect us to come back after the next meeting and find that the insurance carrier is quoting us a huge big savings or a reduction in premiums. So that, don't hold your breath, that won't happen. There's call out for quotes for the stop loss for the amount above what we're insured for. And 4 of 17 already declined to quote on it because of the pattern. Sometimes the question comes up about should we, and I've asked it, should we look at different, not self-funded? And what the consultant shared was, I believe, 200, right? 200 employees taking 75% of those taking coverage. Yeah, they generally will benefit from self-funded plans. So she reinforced that for us. The devil is in the details of communication. So folks that were using Flex for, medical in the past can't use Flex, can't contribute to Flex on HSA, but they can have Flex for childcare if they have the age. So lots of just confusing things if you don't live in that world. But yeah, they seemed, I asked the group, do you think this is a good thing to offer? And in university, they said, yes, the idea to offer it is a good thing to the group at least.
Can I just clarify one thing Kyle said about the self-funded plan? What I understood her saying, and maybe this is what you meant, is that institutions with at least 200 employees and 75% participating in, self-funded makes
That's
financial
absolutely what I meant,
sense.
yep.
Okay, we're not saying that we have 200 employees with 75%. That's not our numbers. Got it.
And then just to step back, and maybe I jumped the gun on the introduction a little bit because the board is already well aware of what's going on. But just a reminder, this is being driven by the fact that our health insurance plan needs changes. We do have some very high claims, and some of it we can try to handle through preventative measures and educating our staff, but some of it is just the demographics. And every organization is going to go through trends, and right now our trend is we have some very high claims, and we know that as a school district we're going to have to make some changes because continuing on this path just is not affordable. And I don't think anybody really doesn't understand that. I think staff members know that there's going to have to be an increase. We're trying to mitigate that increase through some plan design changes the best that we can.
Two things I would share that was in the presentation, if people are wondering, that the prescription drug claims currently account for 21.6% of the total claims, and the industry average she shared was 20 to 25. So we're not overspending on drugs compared to any other insured bunch of people. And also large claimants, 24.9% of total claims are due to large claimants over $65,000 annually. And again, typically 20 to 35% industry. So we're experiencing what any employee of our size would experience in the mix of what we're paying out.
Will you have an embedded deductible for your high deductible health plan next year? And did they talk about the difference?
She did bring up the difference. I don't know, since I was there, she did bring that up and went into great detail, and yes, was the answer.
Yeah, I'd have to get back to you with the details on that, Angie, but.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, I did ask about that because I did not know what she meant by embedded in that context. So I got a very good explanation.
Yeah, the actual deductible numbers are still pending. But yeah.
Yes, I'll just reiterate some of the areas last time, which is a kind of looming concern for me, which is that, we have definitely employees at kind of the lower end of the wage scale for whom the medical insurance is a huge portion of their pay. And just, as we navigate the plan and the design, make sure it's sustainable, making sure that we don't tip the scales for those people so dramatically that that it's no longer, that they can't survive on the wages that we can provide. So I know it's a very tricky thing. But we've often talked about the importance of retention, the importance of paras, the importance of all the people who help out in the district who aren't, salary teachers, and how crucial they are to the work that we do. So just making sure we can retain them, make sure they're living a healthful and sustainable life.
With respect to that specific kind of population, would the HSA plan provide an option that mitigates that?
Please correct me, but the nature of a high deductible plan is you have a high deductible. So if something happens, there's a big cash payout, and then people with lower wages are less likely to have a big pot of cash that they can burn if they have some accident or some severe crisis. So for people, in my experience personally, I'm speaking totally for myself here, not for the district, right? I usually have an HSA high deductible plan because we've been lucky about having fairly few pre-existing conditions, and feel that we can probably get by if there's a high deductible event. But that is this is why there has to be choice, because every family is different, every needs of every family is different, and adding choices I think is a good thing.
And I think that's one of the goals that we have. Right now, really the option is, just to make your investment in premiums. Whereas, providing an additional choice, you could choose a lower premium and then, control your spending the best you can. No matter what, there's going to be risk, but at least this provides one more option.
Will the district be adding to the HSA account one time a year or helping to fund that?
The way the finances are right now, Angie, there's no recommendation for providing a contribution to the HSA. Certainly something that could be considered, but like I said, the way the finances are adding up, I think even doing this is still going to be, there's going to be a hefty investment by the district.
Well, honestly, then that's a great point for the future. I mean, it gives us an option, another option as we settle. So how do we compensate people? How do we, it does give us another option if funds are there at some point. More flexibility.
Great question. Any more questions or comments, thoughts about the health insurance renewal? Do you want to revisit the timeline at all? I guess you don't want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, just that, we're getting the final numbers and we'll be bringing the recommendation for the board to approve in October.
And the next committee meeting is October 16th, I believe. Is that right? If there's nothing else, we can move on to a review of our final budget revisions for 2022-23.
So board members, you'll be reviewing the final budget revisions, or you have reviewed them tonight. We'll be asking for your approval of those at the next board meeting. Leo's not able to be here, but she shared some notes with me that the majority of the budget revisions in Fund 10 and Fund 27 are grants-related budget revisions and financial reporting on GASB 96 subscriptions-based informational technology arrangements. That's a mouthful. ESSER 2 revisions were needed to basically spend down the ESSER 2 funds, and then ESSER 3 revisions were made based on the actual activity spent. So just to review, ESSER 2 would need to be spent this fall. ESSER 3 will be expended by the end of the school year going into next fall. So that's where those budget revisions come from. Fund 39 budget revision was for the referendum approved debt service defeasance in June. Fund 46 revisions was for the increase in revenue from interest earned and focus on energy rebate. There also was some equipment purchased related to the sports complex. Not large equipment, but an example would be the 4 large poles that are on the north side of the complex needed padding around those poles in case a student was to run into one of those poles during some sort of competition. It was a good investment. And then Fund 73 OPEB budgeted revenues were decreased due to us not needing to make a contribution to the retiree premiums. However, expenditures did increase due to higher than expected claims. So that pretty much covers the budget revisions. And if you have additional questions, certainly let me know, and Leah can speak to those before the board considers the revisions in October.
Anybody have questions, thoughts or concerns about the budget revisions? Seeing none. Next, we have the operational referendum for 2024.
So last summer, the board discussed the possibility that the school district might need to consider a referendum for the 2024-2025 school year. Work on the preliminary budget for this year indicated an ongoing structural deficit, mostly caused by inequitable revenue limits and the state not providing enough new revenue to keep up with inflation. And I think we all understand what inflation has been. As can be seen in the graphs that I shared with the board, our school district has consistently operated below the state average for the amount of revenue allowed per student. And the revenue gap between the SDMA and the state average has gotten much wider in recent years. We used to run fairly parallel, even though we were less than the state average, but in recent years you can see a divergence. In 2023-2024, the revenue limit for Menomonie was nearly $1,000 per student less than what it should have been had the revenue limits continued to be indexed with inflation. So again, really the crux of the problem is that the revenue limits when they came in the early 90s were intended to be indexed with inflation, but really in the last decade and a half, it slipped. And that's really created a wide gap for our school district. According to data from the DPI, the Department of Public Instruction, and analysis by the Wisconsin Association for Equity and Funding, Menomonie would have received more than $30 million of additional revenue since 1993-1994 if the district's revenue limit had been at the state average. So, you know, that shows you we've been behind the state, and $30 million since 1993, you know, has been lost because we're not at the state average. But the school district has done a really good job over this time, you know, doing more with less. We have a long history in the SDMA of planning ahead, reducing debt, saving for capital expenses, and the board has been instrumental in that. But despite all that, this ongoing problem has become more challenging with the recently signed state biennial budget that did not include enough new revenue to replace federal pandemic funding and account for staffing shortages and historically high inflation. It was anticipated through preliminary budget work that without additional revenue or a significant reduction in expenditures, the SDMA budget would include deficits that would not be sustainable into the future. We discussed this funding crossroads. We called it a funding crossroads. We discussed it a lot during the annual meeting on August 21st. Despite careful and frugal use of the federal pandemic funding to balance our budget over the last 4 years, it's not possible for the district to balance future budgets without additional revenue or reduction of expenses. Since state laws cap the amount of revenue that can be approved by the local school board, a referendum passed by the community is needed if the board decided that the best course of action was to exceed the revenue limit to generate more revenue. That's the funding mechanism that a majority of school districts in Wisconsin have already turned to, which has left us even further behind in per pupil spending. On a side note, 877 referendums have been passed in Wisconsin to exceed the revenue cap since 1993. In the Big Rivers Conference, Eau Claire, they've had referendums in 1997, or I'm sorry, 1999, 2007, 2016. Durant had a operating referendum in 2012. Elmwood, 2007, Hudson, 2001, River Falls, 1998, and Spring Valley, 2016. Without a successful referendum in the SDMA, drastic steps would be needed to reduce expenses in ways that would likely include the reduction of programming, services, and staff, the deferral of important capital maintenance and technology projects, the acquisition of additional debt, increased class sizes, and potentially even the closure of some district schools. Now that the on-site portion of the 2022-2023 audit is finished and work on the 23-24 budget is nearing completion, a picture for the financial future of the SDMA is becoming more clear. It's really difficult to predict how inflation will continue to impact the school district into the future, but our projections currently indicate that we have a recurring annual structural deficit somewhere in the range of $2 to $4 million. It's important that the board decides what to do with this structural deficit in a timely manner. Decisions for next school year related to student programming, class sizes, staffing plans, compensation plans, and summer maintenance projects will need to be made in early 2024. So there's a whole lot of information about what it's like to go to referendum and what the legal requirements are. But the next two elections, excuse me, I must have been yelling too much at the Packer game yesterday. The next two elections during which a referendum could be held are February 20th, 2024, or April 2nd, 2024. So I've shared with the board the different timelines. Certainly there's a lot to think about in doing this, but I will also say that the earlier the better. You know, especially with the challenges that schools are experiencing with staffing shortages, it could be quite difficult and perhaps even damaging to district operations if we wait till April. You know, we're going to be out there trying to hire staff members early in the spring, maybe even late in the winter. And if we don't know what our revenue is going to be, if we don't know what our compensations plans are going to be, if we don't know what our staffing plan is going to be, that's going to put us behind the 8 ball in trying to make sure we have the best staff possible for the 2024-2025 school year. We do have a fund balance that would be sufficient to operate on for a little while, but I really want to warn the board from doing that. We're talking about recurring expenses. We're talking about expenses that are going to go on beyond 1 year. And when you use one-time money, like a savings account or like a fund balance, to pay for ongoing expenses, it really is a recipe for disaster. To make matters worse, one of the first things that we did when I came here is we wanted to get our fund balance to a position where we weren't having to pay for borrowing money. We don't receive all of our revenue right away in the school year. In fact, we don't receive it on a regular basis. So when we talk about payroll throughout the school year, there's times where our cash flow is very, very minimal. And we're still able to swing it and we're not having to borrow money, but it used to be almost commonplace for school districts to have to borrow money to make payroll, and you'd have short-term borrowing or line of credit expenses. So it's kind of a vicious cycle once that fund balance gets depleted. So what we've done, you know, we've created budget projections, we've reviewed referendum regulations, we've been collecting information from other area school districts that have already gone to referendum, and at this point, you know, we're sharing with the board a bunch of different options, a bunch of different ideas. We're planning to use school perceptions. They're a firm that does educational research and surveying communities. We've used school perceptions before for surveying our staff, and it's gone quite well. But we're hoping to survey our community in October so that the board would have additional information before making any kind of decision. But I have, like I said, shared a lot of information with the board about how our school district compares with our neighbors, our conference, how our revenue and our per pupil revenue compares with inflation. And I've also shared with you an initial draft of the survey. And I guess at this point, probably just open up for the board members to ask questions, provide feedback, offer suggestions. But unfortunately, this is an issue that needs to be dealt with.
I would just like to say I appreciate all of the background info that we have. It's really helpful. It paints a clear picture. It's maybe grim, but it's a very clear picture.
I appreciate it, Dominique. I wish it was clearer than it is. But the fact of the matter is that even this year's budget is very unsettled. You know, we had our annual meeting, but we still don't know what our FTE is. I mean, we have our initial third Friday count, but all the calculations need to be done. We don't know what our state aid is going to be. We'll get our certified state aid in October. We don't know what our property valuation is, even though we're told it's probably going to be about a 16% increase in overall property valuation. So we're dealing with a lot of moving pieces, but that's just how school finance works. So I appreciate that you think it's clear.
The situation is clear.
Well, as clear as it can be.
Dale, did you have a question?
I would, you gave us a range of structural deficit potential. I think I would aim toward the higher amount, just for safety's sake, and that would be my take on this. I have a question about the other area referenda. Were they recurring, offhand?
I don't know exactly which ones may have been recurring. Certainly recurring referendums have been more difficult to pass. The problem with a non-recurring referendum is kind of a Band-Aid approach. And it's awfully difficult to make commitments and investments in programming and staffing, for that matter, when the source of revenue might only be 3 years or 5 years. I would say there's more non-recurring referendums because I think in some cases districts wait too long, or they've already started that cycle of non-recurring referendum, so then they're forced back to a referendum 3 or 4 or 5 years later, and the results of that can be very difficult.
I'll just mention anecdotally from being at the school board convention last year, I know that when they talked about districts that have used non-recurring referendum, it seems like a lot of them have a cycle where they know that they're just going to keep doing this every 3 years, every 5 years, whatever it is, which is a lot of work. And there's some risk risk involved in that, even if the community is sort of prepped for it.
I really can see the issue where our funding is so low and how much money we've lost through the years because of not keeping up with that. And that chart to me tells a whole lot as to where other school districts are way up per pupil and we're down much lower. And I think that right there, is proof that we need to do something.
And moreover, on that comparison, I think you're looking at, I mean, it's not just that we're on the low end, but it's getting wider. The last few years, it's not just that we're toward the bottom, but other places are climbing and we're flattening out, it looks like to me, and that's really concerning, thinking ahead, for those of us who have kids in school now, like what's going to be like in 10 years if that trend continues, right? So that's definitely something to be addressed. On the point of getting on a cycle, I mean, I know that from conversations with nearby school boards that there are school boards, some of them listed in that list, who are thinking about just every 3 years we got to do this, and they're really worried about that being non-recurring repeatedly because it just expends a huge amount of effort, and they're kind of they get on this treadmill and can't get off if they go that non-recurring route. So, anecdotally anyway.
And along those lines, Abe, I've seen it before too, where, if you're gonna go to referendum every 3 years or every 5 years, the amount of time that the board, the administrative team, and community is spent talking about funding replaces conversations that could be about programming. It could be about what's best for kids. And, if we have to do that, we have to do that, because you have to keep the doors open, you have to operate. But I really think you're losing out on an investment of time if that's how you're going to do it. And again, we're talking about recurring expenses. And the other thing that's important to talk about with an operational referendum, just because a referendum passes, whether it be recurring or non-recurring, doesn't necessarily mean that automatically hits the property tax. There's things that schools can do to try to maximize state aid, and I think we've shown a really good ability to do that. Also, the school board still has control in setting a levy. One of the first district I was in, the board did not maximize their revenue limit authority on a referendum that was passed. When I was in Cadott for 5 years, our school district was $2 million under the revenue limit. The board had $2 million of additional revenue limit authority that they did not use. Now, the funding situation there was totally different. So I'm not saying that necessarily is what would happen in Menomonie, but the fact of the matter is there still is local control. Right now, there really isn't local control. We're really up to whatever the state says we can get, and it's not enough. Whereas at least if there is revenue limit authority, then there's some local control in terms of the board determining and representing the community what we want our schools to look like.
Short of planning cuts, we don't really have a choice but to ask to raise the revenue limit for at least a year or two out. We just don't have that option. I wish we didn't have to do that. We sit here as the board and we have to make whatever decisions we have with the facts we have. And we're in a system right now where the legislature does prefer, as Joe said, local control. And that's fine to me because generally I think our community supports more school. So the legislature delegates to the community the ability to determine what investment they want to make in the school and the children, the instruction, and everything else. So, from my perspective, it's more of a discussion of what should that amount be that we ask? Should it be recurring? Should it be one time? I realize there's a higher chance of not passing a recurring, but we're not talking about asking for money that exceeds the average here. We're not asking for Corvettes for the school board. We're talking about, can we spend what other districts are spending when we're already getting, as the team pointed out, really good outcomes from our students with what we have been able to use for revenue. Not that more revenue necessarily means we'll get better outcomes, but if we don't get more, we are going to lose staff. We are going to not have, who wants to come to work at a place where you don't know where your funding will come from next year or the year after. So I think going to our community and explaining and asking, I think it's fine. I think that's the structure we're set up for. And I guess as a board, if the community doesn't want to support that, then we get to be the ones that sit here and say, here's what we have to cut. But we're not there yet, and we don't want to cut. That's not the point right now.
I also think it's really important to think about if we're moving into this and getting a perception survey from the community to kind of judge that this survey is going to be the first time that some of these people have heard about it. There's going to be families that just, and well, we have a lot of information and things are very clear for us, I think. For people who came to the annual meeting, that was a really beautiful kind of layout and took us through it. I know that there's a word count for surveys, there's an amount where it's just too much information for people to handle. But I do think that we could work really closely with the outside, the school perceptions thing, and make some of this a little bit more accessible if the goal of the survey is both to gather information and to be one of the first educational pieces that might be in front of people's eyes?
I think you're right on, Amber. I don't know if we can do it all with the survey. My plan is that after we get through this meeting tonight, so, as you know, I share with the staff after every board meeting what's happened at the board meeting. Certainly I'll share with the staff. I also plan to share with the community a bunch of this information and alert the community to the fact that there will be a survey coming. So I think there's some educational pieces that should go even before the survey. And I think that's probably around the same wavelength on that.
Yeah.
That additional education is needed.
Even on the survey too, if there was, a place that referred back to a website that had a bunch of the frequently asked questions.
Good idea.
Or links to specific things that said, okay, so if we agreed to put a referendum in place, is it people who own property? Do renters pay? Some of those things that do need to be broken down, and maybe this isn't exactly the medium, but if it can be driving people to a clear, transparent place where they can get that information.
I think that's a great idea. We certainly could create a web page on our district website that could house a lot of this background. I mean, and there is a wealth of background already available, but we could build that web page, organize it, and then, like you said, direct people back to that. Because I do think it would be too much to try to put 6 graphs and multiple paragraphs of background information in the survey itself, but having it available is very important.
This is a great idea. Additionally, I think that one thing as I read the sample survey that struck me is that the questions are all about, let's say, like, negatives one way or the other. Like, here's your tax rate versus here's the things we have to cut. As opposed to what I think I believe that people are more thoughtful. They see this kind of, not just con this, this con versus that con, but, kind of pro versus con in the sense of look at where we are and where we could be. And, again, you don't want to fill a thing with graphs, but like, some synopsis of what's in that comparison graph that you showed us that really does demonstrate, like, if you see that graph, you see there's a need, right? There's like, it hits you right in the face in that graph. And, the current survey draft, it talks about the mill rate, and that's also a very informative graph, but it doesn't always say, like, well, what does that mean in terms of, the student, right? That's the thing that I think it might be missing in that first part about, like, what does this mean for a kid in school? What are they getting through their teachers and through their support networks, versus just the mill rate? And the mill rate is very important. It's as I said, it's a collaboration between the district and parents and community members and taxpayers all together. But I think it's kind of focused a little bit on the mill rate side and the cutting side, as opposed to like, and here's what is going to students.
Any other thoughts?
If I remember at one point when we had the referendum, the building referendum that made our schools safer and the new gym and all of that at the high school several years ago, I know that there were, we had some public forums too, where there was a minute we had PowerPoint or something and share some of that kind of stuff. And I would hope that that would be another way too, even if you don't get very many people, even just a few sometimes. But that's another means of communicating the issue with the community. So I hope that that would be something that would be done as well. It has to be a lot of different ways because, as Amber was saying, there's a lot of people out there that don't pay attention, or don't have the time, or whatever the reason is. And so I think it's important that we find as many venues as we can to get the information out to the public.
Well, there needs to be at least 70 days between a board resolution to go to referendum and the referendum election. So I would anticipate those 70 days would be booked up. So yes, that certainly would be part of the plan. I think what's most critical for tonight though is that, getting input from our community before making a resolution is very important. And I think that's where the survey goes. And I think to Amber's point, having some pre-education and notification of the survey coming. To Abe's point, maybe modifying the survey a little bit to have just a little bit more background of the good things that are going on. Certainly we have to be wise with the length of the survey. And then to Dale's point, we're looking at a range somewhere between $2 and $4 million of the structural deficit. I think I calculated it would be probably maybe even just slightly above $4 million a year to get us to the point where we would have been had revenue limits been indexed to inflation this entire time. I really think that's more the number of what it would take to sustain our programming. So to me, that makes sense to survey our community of what kind of support there would be for that. In October, we'll have enough feedback to then develop and hopefully eventually approve a resolution that would go to a vote of the community. I guess that's how I see this playing out. And then whatever resolution is done, once that's done, then there certainly would be a ton of outreach to educate, inform, and answer questions related to the actual vote.
The survey worked very well the last time that we had the referendum. I think we had, and that, was like, for instance, should we tear down the high school and build a brand new one, or should we just improve, it's already there, and that's pretty much what the community decided was, to just improve our buildings.
And School Perceptions has a remarkable track record of being able to predict the results, and because of the way they conduct their surveys, the reliability of their surveys, I think they're really able to give boards a good idea of where the community is at. And like it says right in the beginning of the draft survey, this needs to be something that is decided by the community, and that's where that community feedback is so important. So I do trust School Perceptions. When I looked at the draft survey, I thought, oh, why isn't there more of a menu of choices? But the way the survey is answered a lot, and the way that they're able to analyze the data allows them to provide the board with very, very good advice in terms of where the community is at. So I do think they have a good process, and I think we should trust that process along with providing our own local suggestions and local flavor.
Just one remark to what Dale said about the range. And it's a very it's probably the most sensitive question. I feel that it's important that we have a school which is not just scraping by or sustainable, but it's really healthy, right? We want really healthy, active schools that are doing great stuff, and that we get to ask this question once, right? So let's make sure. We're not gonna put gold plating on the ASC building, right? But looking at what does it take to both solve this problem and to make sure that our schools are what we really want them to be, right? As healthy, fiscally sound institutions looking into the future. And so that I just echoing kind of what Dale said before, don't, if you aim too low out of a sense of being a little concerned about, what is the community up for? What might end up happening is that you pass a referendum and it doesn't quite solve the actual financial problem long term, and in several years we're we're kind of stuck again, and we can't ask again because we've already gone through this whole routine. So I feel I want healthy schools, not just sustainable, but really actually healthy. And I think we do. We have fantastic schools. I don't want to diminish that. I think we're doing an awesome job, and I think every dollar is being spent extremely well through a lot of hard work by a lot of people, and to see that be whittled away with a decreasing budget is is deeply concerning. But if we can keep that momentum going, I think we're in a really great spot.
Abe, that point is well taken, and I agree with you and Dale. I think, especially for the survey, it's important to note if there's that kind of commitment to investment from our community. And I do think our schools are doing really well right now. And then that's what we want to try to continue with this. Because with the amount of cuts it would take to balance the budget, it would have dramatic impact on what our schools currently look like. And I know you and I have talked before, a lot of people's frame of reference from school, our age, or I know I'm a little older than you, but you think back to when you were in school, whether it be the 70s, 80s, 90s, a lot of our parents, they probably went to school in the 90s or early 2000s, and if you just look at the value of a dollar and you look at where our school is on the trend for funding compared to inflation, it really is amazing we're able to do what we've been able to do with the funding that we have, because our funding, when you compare dollar to dollar, is significantly different than it was in the mid-90s. Menomonie was funded at a much higher level when compared to the state as we are now. So I do think it makes sense. I mean, we certainly need to consider affordability, and that's where I think we need to hear from our community. The property values are just skyrocketing, not just Menomonie. I mean, inflation is hitting all over, and that's going to be a challenge for everybody. It is tough though when you see, the schools you are compared to, the schools that our kids go and play football against, or, science Olympiad against, or, have a singing festival and multiple schools are there, and to think that, some students are walking through the door that are being funded at maybe $14,000 a student or more, and you walk in from Menomonie and you're being funded at less than 11,000, closer to 10,000 right now. That makes a big difference.
Joe, in the materials you mentioned potentially just using whatever number it takes to be at the indexed amount. I want to be sure I'm understanding that. When I look at the graphs, it says state average. Is that the number we'd be chasing, or would it be our number indexed for inflation? Would that be the same or different?
It would be different. I think my personal opinion is that it would be too big of an ask to ask our community to get us up to the state average spending. We're so far below it. I think the amount of investment it would take for our community to get to bump us there right now would be too much.
So I mistakenly used the word average earlier, I think, in one of my comments. We're not talking about the average. We just want to be keeping up with inflation.
I think it would be a worthwhile and still a big investment, but if we could just get to where Menomonie should be funded, if our revenue limit had been indexed to inflation this entire time, it still would be below the state index inflation. It still would be well below the state average, but at least it would be to where, we're not losing the value of our dollar over the last couple decades.
I think that's important messaging too then. We would still be below the state average with whatever we ask for. And I don't know how others feel, but as far as the survey going out with a number in it, I'm very comfortable to delegate that to the admin team, because I think those numbers are going to come down to the wire. I don't want to have to be trying to coordinate an answer, and what do you think about this, or special meeting, or I think if that's the concept and we're all supportive of it, I'm fine with that.
And we're talking about the survey, not the resolution.
For the survey language.
Yeah, the resolution needs to be approved by the board, but in terms of deciding what to ask in the survey, I think that would be a reasonable suggestion.
There was once there, do I recall correctly that if we were to do a referendum early enough in 2024, I believe it's February, that if it were to fail, we would have time to look again before the budget is completely wiped out that year? Like, would we still have time in November or August or?
Yes, and the next election would be in November of 2024, and the board's going to go through this in just a little bit. Actually at the end of next month, the board's going to approve the final budget, and the board's going to set the levy for this school year. And once that levy is approved by the board, then it needs to be certified and sent out to the different taxing entities. What happens in a situation where a referendum is held on the November election is a board has brought 2 budgets and 2 tax levies, and the board approves both of those contingent upon the results of the election. So it is possible for the board to come back with another referendum question in November 2024, but just think about that for a second. That means we still won't know, if it was this year, we still won't know what our revenue is for the current year. So you'd have to do one of 2 things. You'd either have to cut in case it doesn't pass, or you would have to take a leap of faith and plan to use fund balance if it doesn't pass. Either way, it's not a very good option. But if the district's finances are back against the wall, I think it's probably something that have to be done.
Right, and I guess the point is that if there's not a, looking at these numbers, if there's not a referendum at any point, there's going to be drastic cuts. That's a certainty. So, you know, if the referendum happens, if the referendum were to happen in February, you could plan for the coming year, right? If it were to happen in April, you could barely plan for the coming year. If it were to happen in November, we'd already be in a crisis mode, but could scrape together the following year, right? So it's just, you know, the later it happens, the higher risk and more damage is done to the financial situation.
And just to give it some context, you know, with the federal pandemic funds, certainly the number one goal and the number one need was to deal with whatever we had to do with the pandemic right away. I mean, you know, getting hand sanitizer, getting computers, you know, we had to get a ton of extra computers, you know, make sure virtual learning was set up. We had to hire a bunch of extra staff members, substitutes, virtual teachers, all that stuff. So you had those big expenses that really were almost non-negotiable. But then a lot of school districts, I don't know, a lot is not probably a fair term, but a number of school districts then thought, well, boy, we have this federal pandemic money, and you know, we can update our HVAC systems, or we can put a new roof on, or do whatever. We didn't do any of that. We were very cautious, and what happened, what we were concerned with, is exactly what happened. The state said, okay, you guys have this federal pandemic money, we're not going to give you any new dollars for 2 years. So for the past 2 years, we used our pandemic funding to operate. And this year, we're actually using about $2.5 million of federal pandemic money to balance our budget. So we can operate, we can continue with our programming. That money's gone after this year. You know, so we did get a bump in the new state budget, but it's not even close to being enough. So, you know, it's not that it was poor management. I mean, if anything, we did a great job in how we handled the pandemic funding. We made a bunch of reductions as soon as we could, you know, in terms of, you know, having extra staff members and such. But the fact of the matter is that if we want to continue with the current program we have, we're going to need more revenue.
I just want to jump in and make sure that any board members we haven't heard from have a chance to voice any concerns or questions. Any additional thoughts?
Just to clarify then, is it the consensus of the board that you are delegating the survey responsibilities to me and the administrative team? Anybody objecting to that?
We can still offer feedback though before.
Oh, please do.
Okay, that's all. Yeah, you guys do it and let's look at it.
Great. Feedback this week though, please.
And the main considerations with respect to that, maybe tweaking some questions, but then also sort of dialing in the best estimate for a number that we're asking for. And I think what Carl said was exactly right. There's a lot of moving pieces you have to figure out, and I think we can have faith that you can come up with the best number to put in there.
All right, thank you.
Additional discussion on the referendum? If not, we can move on. I guess
it sounded there was general, those of us that spoke generally, I think, are alluding to a recurring option being the preferred. But is anyone feeling that that's not the right way to go on the first attempt at a referendum?
and again, that's, as Joe mentioned, that is something, the board will have to pass a resolution probably in the first meeting in December. And that decision will be, officially made. So what was in the survey is what we hope for, but we aren't making it, that's not an official decision.
Rachel, I'm glad you brought up the timeline, and I think that's something, and I know we want to be done here, it's getting long, but I do think we should look at the survey timeline. And so the survey would be finalized by October 2nd, and then it would be emailed to the staff on October 12th. It would land in mailboxes approximately October 18th. There would be about a 3-week window. The survey deadline would be November 6th. And then what School Perceptions is suggesting is that the board has a special meeting the week of November 12th. Now, we do have a regular meeting scheduled for the 12th, but I think we're going to want more time to look at those results, and I think the board is going to need a work session to really delve into what kind of resolution the board wants to consider. And then ideally, by November 27th, the second meeting in November, the fourth Monday, is when the board can make the decision to go or not go and approve the resolution. If we wait till the first regular meeting in December, I think we're cutting it awfully tight in terms of hitting our deadline. So this is the recommended timeline.
Yeah, sorry, I misspoke.
No, that's fine, I'm glad you brought it up.
One remark on the survey as well. I think it's worth thinking about the survey, whatever the results are of the survey, it doesn't change the financial situation, right? So it gives us information on what is palatable to the community at large, at least those who respond, and gives some guidance on how, what the impressions and influences are. But, how that survey comes back, the financial situation is still the same. And the same decisions will have to be addressed by the board one way or another. And so it's really worth thinking, like, what information will we gain from that survey? It's not, I don't think we gain a yes or no, right? We gain a how and when, right? So.
But to even to Carl's question about recurring versus non-recurring, I think the survey will help inform the board on that and the amount.
All right, now I'm moving us on to extracurricular report.
Rachel, this is just the informational report the board sees every month. There's only a couple listed on the report, so unless there's any questions, it's just informational.
I have no questions. I'm not going to read through the upcoming meeting dates. Everyone can please take a close look at that. I'm just going to mention October 4th, the WASB Regional Meeting right here in Menomonie again. Hope to see a lot of us there.
We are asking school board members for a picture. School Board Appreciation Week is coming up the first week of October. If you would like, I have my phone here. We can step out in the lobby. It just needs to be a headshot. WASB. I don't know how to use any filters or anything. Maybe one of the other directors does, but WASB has a nice template, and I think it would be nice. We haven't done anything like that before, so if you would please either get us a picture or let one of our directors snap a picture quick, we'd appreciate it.
Thanks for that. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.